Hey guys, my name's Evelynn Cosplay, also known as Lady Lord Vader on Instagram, and welcome to my first cosplay tutorial. Now, I know you're going to try and skip this first part, and I'm going to tell you please don't, because I have sort of like disclaimers, I guess, or something prelude leading into this entire video. To start, KDA Evelynn was a speed build. I built her in a week for DaishoCon. Given that being said, that means I wasn't really able to order the foam I probably would have done this with, or wire I would have done the lashers with. I kind of just had to make use with what I was able to get my hands on, either that I already had or that I could get in store or Amazon Prime. I used 2mm craft foam because I can easily get a whole roll of it, 60 inches in length at Michael's for $5. So I went with that, and then I also had wire, 10 gauge wire that I was able to use. So if I was able to do it differently, I would probably end up using a thicker gauge wire and 1/4 inch foam. Otherwise, maybe I would have even done my gluing a bit differently, leaving a non-glue area where I would lay the wire. Probably would have tested it a little bit more, but like I said, it was a speed build and I kind of just went at it. So this is how I built mine, and this is how I'm probably going to have it, because I always tell myself I'm going to remake stuff for my cosplays and then I don't. And I'm not really comfortable with my sewing. So I do have sewing in this video, but there's not too much of it. I'll put what time sewing starts here in case you want to, jump forward and skip the foam. But I don't show me drafting the skirt and the top patterns, but I do show you the patterns. They're not perfect. The top I want to remake, but whatever. And yeah. Be sure to watch till the end of the video, otherwise let's jump into it with the foam. So first I start with a whole roll of 2mm craft foam. It's 60 inches in length and about 40 inches wide. I use the entire 60 inches for my tails, so they are as long as possible. I then trace them, and I have cut down the middle slats so I can mark down the middle of the pattern, which is where the wire will sit. You'll see that my foam is slightly larger than my pattern. I cut my foam into 4 separate pieces that all roughly fit the pattern so I can glue it together, and then cut the pattern out of the glued pieces with nice clean edges. Next, I am just slapping some glue on that. I'm gonna glue them all together. I only put the markings for the center wire on 2 of the pieces, since I only need 1 wire per tail, so I only marked 2 pieces, and I made sure to bend the wire at the end just so it's a little bit stronger at the base. So I'm going to do a little bit of glue talking. When your contact cement is completely set up and ready to use, it should be tacky. Nothing will come off though, but it should be tacky. Sometimes when I'm having a hard time getting 2 pieces together and I'm afraid of other contact cement attaching to something else I don't want it to, I'll use a thick plastic like this. Otherwise, for flat pieces, it really works with parchment paper like it does for these tails. Both of these work just to keep the glue from catching itself. So here I'm showing you with the plastic. The plastic sticks very well to the contact cement, but as you can see, nothing comes off of it. The parchment paper, when you lay that down, that doesn't stick at all, which is why it only works for flat pieces, because it won't stay up in place if you have it on a dimensional object. So here I am laying down the wire. This was a mock video since I didn't originally record me doing any of these techniques with my tails, and you'll see it later on after this, but this is just kind of demonstrating using the parchment paper to lay my foam down. So I should have started by laying down that long side first, but instead I kind of went and laid down the small side. So whatever, it still works. This, as you can see, it allows me to lay down my foam without having to worry about it sticking improperly and then not having a completely flat foam structure. So then I start pushing down the top layer around the wire, and since it's on a flat surface, it'll help the other side stay as flat as possible. And that way, ta-da! I have this little thing that maybe I'll use for something else later on. But here's back to the tails. So this is what I ended up doing. I didn't do the techniques. This is just me laying it down, and it is very difficult with 60 inches of foam. So that's why I ended up going back and including those techniques, because this is not for the faint of heart. You can see here where it actually caught wrong, but it didn't stick so weirdly that I was just like, you know what, I'll just smooth it out. It's whatever. Who cares? But on the second tail, it actually did catch wrong, and I did end up ripping the foam, but thankfully it was on the end and on the inside. So now I am laying down my pattern again. I am trying to line up that middle spine with my wire spine as close as possible. And since my wire wasn't perfectly straight, you can see I actually ended up having a little bit of buckling problems with my pattern, but that's okay. Again, it's foam, it's versatile, whatever. So I started tracing that out, and when I get to that edge, I kind of just, get it as straight as I possibly can. So before I end up cutting it out with a sharp X-Acto, I press down the edges and then go about cutting it. For the ends where the wire comes out, I cut up to that, and then I cut down the middle, down the wire, and kind of just pop it out of there. You can see that there. I ended up doing it this way rather than cutting the tail shape and then trying to glue that together. That way I have nice clean edges for the entire thing, and they're all cut from the same thing. So give it a little bit of shape, and ta-da! This was a failed video. So here you can see I splayed the end of the wire. That way the foam, when I glue it or sandwich it in there, it catches in between that and it holds it in there so they don't come sliding out or anything. So the lasher pattern that we just worked with, I gave it a 1/2 inch ledge that allows it to sit inside the tips right here for both the front and the back, and then from there I cut my little diamond. Just gonna have a little lasher foam sandwich, you know what I mean? I ended up using 3/4 inch MC 3800 for both these pieces. And while I did actually end up Dremel beveling my tips so they're rounded, I cut them on the bandsaw at 45 degrees first so I had a clean edge. I then ended up changing the bevel just so I could have different dynamics and cut the diamonds at a 35 degree. For the backs, I ended up just tracing what I cut out for the tips and cut it out of 1/4 inch EVA foam. I did a slight bevel on those as well. And as you can see here, I ended up sketching actually kind of like a little point that came off on the inside. That way I can glue my diamond to it. So just carefully cut that out. It's very tricky, you may have to Dremel bevel it. But I ended up switching it over and just kind of working my knife back into the bevels I already put in just to clean it up. And then once that tedious part is done, take it off and you can see I have my back bell sandwich with the front tip around the base of my lasher tail. Here I am matching up the edges of the tip and kind of just marking it on the lasher tail so I know where to put my glue, because I don't want glue overhanging because it will show with the paint. So lay your glue down, be nice and clean with it. And I ended up throwing glue on the entire bottom half of this since I have to glue it also to the entire back. Also, it will then grab around the wire and whatnot. So more glue, more glue. Lay that down, match it up to my markings. The back piece I lined up to the corners first and then matched it up to the inside, and then lastly the bottom edge. And for the top of the tips, I don't need to put glue on the entire thing, just around the edges. So I ended up doing that, and that way it'll allow me to compress my foam so my edges lay cleanly together and I don't have to do more dremeling. Well, more Dremel than necessary, I mean. So I'm just kind of cleaning up edges, making sure they fully line up to each other front and back. And then I can glue my little diamond on. While I wait for that glue to dry, I start sketching that like quilted pattern, whatever. I start with the edges and then I'm kind of just connecting it how hers looks. Place my little diamond on and back to sketching. Then carefully score your foam along the lines that you make, and be careful over the middle when you cut across, as you don't want to cut through and expose your wire. Take your heating gun and lightly hit your foam with some heat. You'll start seeing that foam separate into your pattern. This will also heat seal your foam, so don't forget to get the back as well. After plasti dip and a little bit of painting and airbrushing, I ended up taking some gold acrylic and working it into those lines. I then took a damp washcloth and wiped away the rest of it. I got some nice gold inlay. It's pretty cute. So, coming from my Instagram story next is I used Mylar gift tissue paper on the diamonds in order to give them a shimmery gemmy look. I painted on Mod Podge, laid down some of the paper, saw what shape it made, cut out that shape, and then laid it right back down. Final thing to make this all work is I glued a foam diamond on the back where I had fishing line coming out of, in order to give my lashers a little bit of movability as well as functionality. Like, I don't want to hit someone at a convention with these lashers just flopping around, so I had them hanging from my wrists and I really liked how it looked. And foam details. So these went on my skirt, and because they were both the same height, I ended up just gluing them onto some twill in order so I could have them all be one piece, and it also made it easier to attach it to my skirt. I then just had some scrap foam that I had some pins sticking out of, stuck my little pieces onto it, plasti dip, and painted them that way. For my claws, I ended up taking some paper, wrapping it around my finger, marking where it sat on my finger with my nail, and that would be where I would have to build around. So I gave 1/8 of an inch off of each side in order to make way for the foam thickness so it doesn't sit weird or too tightly on my finger. And then I just sketched my design, cut it out, and then I just wrapped it around my finger to test it. Again, it's going to be a little large as paper because you need that extra space for the foam thickness. And I do the same thing here where I trace the previous pattern, I add about 1/8 of an inch, maybe even larger, and I make my other pattern for the tip of the claw. And then here's both patterns. I also made slightly wider but shorter patterns just for my thumbs. So then I cut my claws out of 2mm craft foam, and on all of the edges I ended up cutting them at a 45-degree angle, so I got a nice ridge on the top of my claws. Then do another test fit, and it fits. So I'll just continue cutting out all of these, and then I start gluing the edges. I use the edge of my glue bottle in order to spread my glue across the foam easily and evenly, and then I just use some scrap leftover foam in order to wipe the tip clean. I then match the top ridges up and just press them together. This one ended up twisting a little bit, but that's okay. We can fix it with the heat gun later. As you can see, I'd recommend after making your patterns, making one of these just to see if it fits your finger. Then for the end claw, I ended up starting at the base point and then squishing everything together. The tip gets a little annoying. I kind of have to mash it in there, but you can also, if you really want to, take your Dremel and just really get that point nice and clean. Now you can see my claw is straight, so I ended up taking it to the heating gun, lightly heat it up, and I end up just kind of pulling the entire thing so it doesn't buckle, and just forming it into the curve that I want. Going back to, if you have any twisting pieces, lightly heat them up on the heat gun and then just kind of push them in the opposite direction, and as you can see, they'll straighten out. So gluing them together, I first put them together to make sure, if any bending, you don't see the back knuckle splitting. And then I put glue on the back knuckle as well as the front. Then to get them together, I squeeze the back knuckle so I have a singular point without catching contact cement anywhere else. I match the top and the bottom, and then I push the two sides together, and you got a claw. Don't forget to heat seal. On to sewing. So for the sleeves, I marked up my fabric 1.5 inches on either side, and then I think I skipped 4 each and laid down and made a cross-hatching pattern with a water-soluble blue marker. I then carefully went across each line with puffy paint, working from top to bottom rather than keeping with one line the entire time, as I didn't want to go across it and accidentally smear it. For the sleeves, I ended up cutting a strip of my fur and giving a 1/4 inch seam allowance on my elastic that fits me well on my upper bicep. I then start sewing and stretching the elastic without stretching the fur. This way it'll group up the fur and I have more fur to my sleeve, and it'll also allow it to stretch around my arms. I start by having the nap away from most of the elastic, as that'll be the top. So here's first line, and then for the second, with nap facing down, I sew it slightly over the previous line and stitch that to the elastic as well, while stretching the elastic and matching it with my fur. Be sure to stitch in large stitch lengths, that way you can work your fur out of there if it accidentally gets caught. So here you can see my first line that I did with the nap going away, and here's the second one that I did with the nap facing down. For my sleeve fabric, I gave it a 1/2 inch hem and I put it on the nap down side. I stretched my elastic and my sleeve material so I can straight stitch it and still have a bit of stretch to it, and that is how my finished edge is. With the fur facing down on that side, it hides it if you have any imperfections. I then did the same for the wrist cuff and then ended up stitching up the entire side in one piece. For my shrug, I started with a rectangular piece about 2 inches wider than my shoulder span of my purple fur. I cut out these darts and stitched them up, then stitched up the entire side seam. I have a little bit more room on the end for an opening, which allowed me to flip it inside out and then hand stitch it to my sleeves. Again, I'm not comfortable with my sewing, so here's my patterns that I had for the skirt and the top. On this side, that is the front of my skirt, and then on the other side is my back seam. And boom, finished skirt. So I used vinyl tape that I use at work. You can use electrical tape though. I recommend it as it does allow you to stretch it. And then I marked with a silver Sharpie just the bottom of the pattern. This will end up getting covered up by the puffy paint. Since I had my skirt on the mannequin, once I laid my skirt down flat. I then continued the patterns that I saw and sketched the rest of the lines for the inside pleat, I guess you would call it. Compared to one line of puffy paint that I used for my sleeve, I used 2 on my skirt, and it thickened it up, and when it starts drying it flattens out pretty nicely. So for my skirt attachments, I ended up using a snap and some Velcro just to keep the back piece from sliding down and looking weird. I then ended up barging on the front Velcro and snaps as well as the skirt details. For gluing anything to a non-porous surface like vinyl or like the back of plastic Velcro, you would want to use barge. Contact cement tends to peel off, so barge would be best for anything that's non-porous. And then on the inside of the skirt, since you don't see it, I just stitched those pieces on. The shoes, I wrapped my heel with saran wrap and duct tape, and then here was my shoe pattern. So it's got a real weird toe to it. Even with me splitting down the toe, it wouldn't have worked. I'd had to put an entire seam down the middle. So I ended up using spandex, and I just rounded out that toe pattern on the bottom, and I could just stretch that over my heel, glue it down, and snip off the excess. Anything with 1/2 inch was a hem, while anything with 1/4 inch was a seam allowance. I sewed 2 of each per shoe and then flipped them inside out, and then I got shoe covers. I ended up just hot gluing the little buckles on, and because everything is spandex, I had no problem getting my foot in through the cuff. Laid some hot glue on the bottom of the platform and just put the spandex over. And that's it for Katie Evelyn. If you guys enjoyed this video, please consider making a donation to my Ko-Fi. Your donation would help me be able to make more videos like this in the future on future upcoming projects. And if you don't follow me already, follow me on Instagram at Lady Lord Vader, otherwise Evelynn Cosplay on Facebook or Evelynn on TikTok. Don't forget to tag me on your Evelynn build if you ended up using this tutorial or if you used any of the techniques used in this tutorial. I absolutely love seeing what you guys make, and if I was able to be a part of that, that is just amazing. Thank you guys so much. When I move that way, you gon' be so blown. I'm the realest in the game,